Yeah. So what were some of the initial changes that you made that you saw, wait a minute, here's a bottleneck. First off, how'd you identify here's a bottleneck? And then what were some of the first tweaks?
So my story here at the store goes, we tweaked everything at the same time. So so that goes back to that I'm that weird guy, right? I don't fall into any category. Um, but no, there were a few things here and there. I mean, one of the very first things we did is we were a paper-based sync program, and we realized with Pioneer, we are not utilizing this program. And so we went completely sync all the way through Pioneer. No paper, no trails, no nothing. So that was the first big one. So we transitioned that. And then the way that I did it is I went out, I talked to friends of mine at Pioneer shows, at other trade shows that I knew were just killing it. They were great pharmacists, had great stores. And I would ask them, what are they doing? What do they like? What do they wish they can change? And then I would actually go to some of their stores. I would go to random independent pharmacies around here. I would just walk in. I'm in town. Oh, there's an independent. Let me stop in there for 10 minutes. And I would just stare at them and see what they were doing. So that's always been a funny story. Everybody laughs because I'm just staring at these pharmacists and the techs, and they're like, what is this guy doing? And eventually they would ask, and I'd say, I own a store. I'm watching your workflow. I'm seeing what you guys are doing good. And they kind of enjoyed that. And we'd start talking back and forth. So I started picking up little pieces here and there that what everybody was doing. And I sit down and I over a time period, I compiled it all together with data. And we started putting a lot of data, numbers, who's doing this, why are we doing this? So it was a process, little bitty. That was probably the biggest tweak that we did before we actually just flipped the switch. And I'm not saying that's the way to do it, but that's just how we were rolling that day. So,
yeah, it is neat. Over the years as an installer, going into so many pharmacies, there can be such a different vibe in the pharmacy based on their workflow. I've been to pharmacies that were just very kind of, just seemed like a very easygoing linear workflow, from one side of the room to the other. And then I've been to pharmacies that kind of had an island that, different color baskets would assemble and then web. And it was everybody's like bumping into each other and moving around, and it's chaos. But it looked like an I Love Lucy episode.
There was a friend of mine in Tennessee. He had one that was a big island in the middle, and they just did a circle around the island. Everything was a circle around the island, and it worked for them. But eventually, you could tell that there was frustration. It just wasn't a really good workflow overall. So,
yeah, I remember years ago before we had the print queue available. Just how much time you would see people spend sorting through patient education and labels and reassembling one patient's orders while you have 4 people sending in labels and everything else. So
we were talking yesterday. It wasn't that long ago. We would print the label out and sit it down, and then the tech would go get the bottle and fill it and sit it on the label, and the pharmacist would check. Everything was on the island or wherever it was, and you would just check it then versus in Pioneer or in whatever system they had. And it seems, in my mind, it seems forever ago. And it really wasn't that long ago that we were just doing these very mundane, old school ways of pharmacy. I couldn't imagine going back to that stuff.
Being in that community for so long, how do you implement change without losing that secret sauce that made you successful, without losing the Forward brand when you came out with that new model?
That's an interesting question because a lot of that thought and that process is a debate I've had with my dad. He's kind of, to me, represents this old school, old fashioned way of doing pharmacy, and I stroll in, having worked in the pharmacy since I was 15, but with a lot of new ideas and new expectations for what it should look like and how we should behave and what we should be spending our time doing. So, I had to as I was implementing those changes, I had to hear the rebuttal and the old-fashioned desire to keep certain aspects of what community pharmacy has always been and keep them intact. So that's always been a huge priority as we switch to Pioneer and as we've evolved kind of our workflow over the years to make sure we maintain that in the process.
Yeah, so that's kind of the problem that I've seen in a lot of pharmacies is they say our patients don't want a change. They don't want to lose that connection. And I was actually in a pharmacy that had that mindset. And while I was there, somebody came up with the weekly planner pill box from the floor, and I was like, your patients want that. They're doing it themselves. They do want to be adherent to their medications. They do want the best way to take their medications because they know that's what's going to keep them out of the hospital. That's what's going to keep them healthy, but it's a struggle. So, how do you maintain that balance? One thing with MedSync is that a good MedSync program has a lot of communication, like maybe even more meaningful communication than just that every now and then, wave over the counter.
Right. And I think that's how our communication has evolved and adapted, is that we have a lot more of that type of specific communication, that meaningful communication. In transitioning someone from non-sync to sync status, the handoff has to enumerate that. You have to really, in my opinion, explain to the patient that we're gaining time in communication with you whenever we synchronize you. And that's really tough to prove to yourself, I think, when you're starting synchronization. Am I gaining more time? And you really aren't up front. Those first handful of patients, a lot of times you're thinking this is just a lot more work. But you have to see the value in it. You have to be able to commit to it. And you have to give it that time to really see, what, this is where it's heading. This is where we need to be. And there really is value for the patient here.
Yeah. And there's a percentage where the scale tips, where initially, if you have a handful of patients, it is more work. It's a new process. But once you have that economy of scale where you have the same process, it's not new anymore, it's when you really start to open things up. So during those first steps, when your team is kind of looking at you like, man, this new guy coming in here with his MedSync and his rock music, is he, this looks like more work for me. Like, how do you get your team on board with a process that, can seem, on the surface, if you're reluctant, it can seem like you're doing this in more of a like closed shop kind of way that's less personal. So how did you kind of counter that with your team?
Well, the first thing is I had to sell out to it myself. I couldn't be fickle on how I felt about it. And so me and another new pharmacist, we kind of took it on that we're going to figure this out. We're going to take a sample of patients and do it for a few months with them and just kind of follow the process, see what, nuances to it weren't readily visible that we needed to kind of come up with answers for, and have those questions addressed before we just jumped head in and dealt with them as a whole company or a whole pharmacy. So, getting that first couple months and figuring it out myself with this other pharmacist, it allowed me to have the buy-in for myself, to be able to then take those case studies to other staff, other pharmacists, and say, this is where this patient was. This is how many times they came in throughout the month. This is how many phone conversations we had with them. This is how confusing their profile was before. And this is where they are now. And isn't this easier now that we manage them this way, not only for us, but really more so for the patient? They only have that one trip in here to pick up 10 medications a month. And I could go on with the benefits of it for probably too long, but I think establishing that vetting process for myself first was most important. Then it allowed me to take it and scale it and go, what is it going to take to get buy-in from the rest of the staff? And how do I implement that? And how do we measure that? And measuring it has been, I would say, key to the growth in our MedSync program throughout the last few years.
I think that there's going to be large-scale disruption over the next 18 months in the way that pharmacies contract for dispensing.
Okay. So
what
does that mean?
What would that be?
What do you think that?
We know I can guarantee there's going to be disruption. What the role of CPESN is, I have no idea right now, but I know that the lines between value-based contracting and services and dispensing and primary care and pharmacy and other plays, what used to be a relatively separated grouping of foods at the buffet line is now getting all mixed together on the same plate, right? Mm-hmm. So I just had this conversation with a luminary this morning. They're like, I'm underwater on the dispensing side, but this is a $300 to $600 opportunity for each one of these patients on the services side. Do I now take that contract? And what happens if I don't have access to that contract because I'm part of a group that says no, when for my pharmacy, this makes sense for me? So, the era that we're getting into is the data that we use, the way we think, and the business model was relatively monolithic because most every patient that walked into a pharmacy generated some kind of a margin. Mm-hmm. Some were smaller, some were larger, but it was as many patients and prescriptions as possible. And now you're seeing, groups run away from Medicare, right? Not just go, oh, this is a tough call. Run away from Medicare, run away from TRICARE,
mm-hmm.
Right? And so between services and where you're located, are you in suburbia? Are you rural? Who's the employer in your town? What's that contract? But now it's 50 to 70% of the patients coming into your pharmacy you might be losing money on, and there's 20 to 30% of your patients that are covering them and producing your margin at the same time. So this idea of a homogeneous way of contracting, a homogeneous practice model, a homogeneous business intelligence that goes with it. I think the care processes will be universal. Please don't change that, Jeff and Marcia and the Pioneer care processes. When it comes to the business of what this location versus what that location is doing to sustain itself, I think we're going to enter an era of heterogeneity.
So you're saying that the pharmacies are way different. They're going to have to specialize and that kind of thing. They're going to negotiate their own contracts. There's going to be less PSAO. Is that
right? If you talk to Tracy Poole, the Meta Spa, and the certain types of testing and travel vaccines are what holds that pharmacy up. If you talk in Nashville, if you talk to Joe, what's holding him up is really good relationships with care management and the complex patients in the MedSync model. When you talk to Kyle at Blueberry, he's a cash-only pharmacy. When you talk to, I'm starting to see it even within the CPESN luminaries, clearly where they're going, where they're trying to get to the place of sustainability. There's different, it's like we're a guidance counselor now, and we're saying, oh, so it's not that we're all going into the same trade now. Mm-hmm. You're going into this trade, you're going into this trade, you're going into this trade, and you're going into this trade. And so that's not a comfortable place for a lot of actors in our industry because they're very used to monolithic ways of contracting and thinking.
Well, they're not business people. I mean, there's your bell curve problem, right?
Because inertia.
You have right? A lot of those people who just don't know how to do that. And that's what Marcia was talking about earlier, getting out of the pharmacy and talking to people and figuring out what the needs in the community are. You have to do that for that to be sustainable.
Let me sort of tie a bow on this with this pithy statement. I believe the pharmacies are more ready for that than everybody that supports the pharmacies or that they work with. The pharmacies are seeking these things out in a more aggressive way as now they're ready to quit smoking, and they're creating the heterogeneity. You probably see this with people say, hey, can I get this? Can I get that? Can I get this? And the list gets longer and more diverse because, you know, like one of the items that came up last night on one of our work groups is, oh, shoot, now Ohio and Missouri don't allow you to put a service in as a prescription. I need a way of accounting differently for services, or I need a, well, yeah, but my pharmacy, I do pharmacogenomics and I need this thing over here. Is that the volume and diversity of requests for even a pharmacy management system or technology become almost overwhelming because of this heterogeneity, right? So whether it's technology, PSAOs, wholesalers, GPOs, this, hey, we're going to do things the way we've done them for 30 years, and we're going to do it in a monolithic way, and our pharmacies are going to be good with that. I got news for you. They're not going to be good with it.
But we're really looking to expand this whole packaging and what we like to call independent living concept. There's a lot of people who don't want a loved one in a nursing home, assisted living. Our box and our service, I feel, is like helps to keep those people in the home.
You guys do a lot of the, you know, facilities and LTC currently. But I noticed that's one of the things that you guys talk about on your website is kind of that alternative. And I thought that was a really interesting kind of thing to focus on, you know, especially on your website, but that, you know, senior care at home.
Well, yeah, I mean, from a business model, look, if we're being perfectly honest, senior citizens take a lot more meds than most people. So our bread and butter is the Medicare population. You know, more and more commercial plans, you're getting squeezed out. You know, they have to go to CVS, they have to go elsewhere. So that Medicare population is really our bread and butter. And really how we got started with any of that, my folks are in their 80s, almost 90s. My mom lays my dad's pills out every night supper time.
Yep.
My mom was in the hospital. My dad called me in tears and said, I don't know what I take. It was like that old story about the shoemaker's kid has no shoes. You know, I was embarrassed. My father didn't know when to take his drugs. So, you know, that was our first foray into compliance packaging. And from there, I realized, look, there's a lot of people in the same situation.
Oh, yeah.
So we don't really focus on facilities as much as we try to focus on that population that is aging in home.
Nice.
Looks like CMS is finally starting to recognize that as well. So that's really our hope for the future is there's better reimbursements and better opportunities in that space, because it's much more cost effective to keep a senior in their home than for them to end up in a nursing home and ultimately on a Medicaid government paid stay. So let's hope the powers that be do that math and realize it.
Yeah, for sure. And there's also something to be said for the dignity and quality of life to be able to, you know, maintain your health longer and stay in your own, you know, environment. What's really cool about that focus is that it's really one of those win-win situations where, you know, the pharmacy is able to provide a valuable service that's going to help the patients. And ultimately, it's going to save, you know, it's going to really improve the effectiveness of a Part D plan. I mean, that's really the entire idea there. And so it's this win-win-win situation where you're combining those enhanced services like delivery, adherence packaging. I'm sure under those circumstances, you have a much better process to kind of, you know, look at their therapeutic profiles and optimize those. It seems like such a no-brainer. And yet at this point, you're still basically only reimbursed for the prescriptions themselves, right?
Correct.
Where do you see that going over the next couple of years? Do you see, you know, CMS, you know, kind of pushing out more guidelines on that?
I mean, they've already started discussing it, but the hope is they'll recognize medical at home as a separate payer class, move away from a lot of the DIRs that are crushing all of us. and possibly a slightly better dispensing fee as well for that service. So that's the Medicare space. Medicaid, it's the same discussion. So for state Medicaid, there's a lot of managed care Medicaid. Everybody's hurting on that. So if you can get your local governments, state governments to recognize this aging in the home place for that population, it'd help a lot too.
Nice.
That's our hope anyway.
So you've got 3 locations. You've identified this kind of unified need where you can pool resources, strip package out of that one location instead of buying 3 strip packaging machines, which can obviously add up very quickly. Not only that, just, it's also staffing and training and everything that goes along with it. So it sounds like you're kind of building your own infrastructure there that's really going to make a big impact on the senior population in your area.
Yeah, that's the hope. I mean, the other nice thing, again, speaking to your software, is I have people cross-trained at the other locations that if someone can't use the interface at the Washington location, someone in one of the other stores can still continue to send jobs over to the robot. So, if you set your computers up right and have enough network access, you can have some layers of duplication. People get sick. People are positive for COVID. We've been able to continue to function without too many hiccups.
One of the things that COVID gave us was this new concept of an appointment in the pharmacy with COVID shots. And I challenge every pharmacist listening, if you don't have an appointment for a pharmacist consultation on that appointment calendar, you need to. And you need to have a $ associated with it. And it needs to be a $ commensurate with your value and your education. So that's not, and I always not jokingly say, it needs to be more than a plumber, right? So we have to be able to receive this change. Yeah. And so pharmacy has to step up and start looking differently and acting differently than just dispensing. And as hard as it is, I have to stop spending my time on prescriptions that lose money and start spending my time on this kind of initiative to be able to situate. It's not my time, my staff's time, right? I have to create an environment where I can receive these patients and then do my clinical due diligence and then make that recommendation and help them along the way. So I think we've got 2 issues. This is going to change, but we've got to be positioning and marketing ourselves as a profession to step up and be that solution.
Yeah, that's so interesting because, while pharmacists are struggling to get paid from their traditional revenue models, so many independent pharmacies do feel like they give away so much of their value. And, they tend to say, my customers won't pay for that. I can't ask for that. And people are willing to pay. Like some of the podcasts that I listen to have Patreons where members who just appreciate that content pay, right? Like that's part of kind of the way we're wired is, we do want to help, and pay for the services that we appreciate and show our appreciation that way. So Bradley, that's one of the things that I saw on the InBody website was there were some resources to kind of help the pharmacy so that you're not feeling around in the dark with that kind of setting up that business model. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're a service business at heart, and we're here to help people implement the tool. And when somebody makes a purchase and it gets out to them, we're going to hold their hand to make sure that they get it up and running and their staff is trained on how to use it and support them along the way to facilitate any type of questions that they have. And also lean on professionals within the field like Dr. Kathy to be able to help them get the return on investment that they want from, actual practical experience. So we're definitely open to helping people as much or as little as they want, but a lot of times we're able to really change the game for people in the way that they see the tool and see their business also around the metrics that come with it. And I think Kathy hit on it really well when she said having a consultation for the pharmacist is going to be probably the first place to start with this tool, where you can
bring the InBody in, and there's probably a lot of conversations that you're already having where you're going to be able to direct traffic to a consultation. You know, it might happen in the aisles, it might happen at the counter, but people are going to ask questions that might be fitting for you to sit down with them and spend a little more quality time with them. And I think if you work on developing that consultation, you'll also be able to work on developing the things on the other side of it. So it's just a matter of you know, taking the time to spend a little more time with them.
You know, creeping into 2023, 2024 is definitely going to have a rough first couple of months, first quarter with the changes in DIR fees. What are you doing this year to kind of plan for that and to start to have an idea what to expect and not be caught off guard in the first quarter of 2024?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the most important aspect is information and correct information. So, you know, call Ben Jolly, get your DIR fees programmed in Pioneer, because if you know what you're getting charged, then you can put that money aside. Yes, sure, there might be cash flow issues, but if you're just hit with a, you know, $50,000 DIR fee bill and you're unaware of it, you can't plan or react to it. So I think having those DIR fees in Pioneer gives us a really, really good assessment of, you know, what we're in for. And then two, just setting that money aside, you know, instead of, you know, buying something additional or whatever it is, putting that money aside in a different account that's going to be our DIR fee account. So come 2024, we have that money set aside so we won't have any really cash flow issues. But I mean, I think the most important thing is getting your DIR fees programmed in and making sure all of your other information is correct. Your acquisition cost is correct. You know, that you're submitting the correct UNC, that you're submitting, you know, that you're reconciling claims, that you're making sure you're getting paid for claims. I mean, I think there's so many missed opportunities from pharmacies, whether it's from the medical side or even just from a, you know, not doing a reconciliation side, that, you know, if we're able to take advantage of and increase the efficiency of that you'll see a lot more cash flow than you would if that's not taken care of.
That is such a good point. You know, kind of in this kind of valley here between COVID and the DIR apocalypse, when things are returning to normal, do some housekeeping while you have the that planning, you know, while you have that foresight, because there's so many little things like that. If somebody has, you know, added an override, or if you're not, you know, submitting the correct NDC, or if you haven't optimized your, at least, you know, your top 200 drugs, and then your high cost outliers, you know, that's one thing you can definitely do. When you can't do much about your reimbursements, you can definitely maximize your purchases.
Yeah, and even just, I mean, we're figuring this out now. Look, if you can decrease your inventory by $50,000, but still be just as efficient, then you know that $50,000 doesn't need to sit on your shelf. You know, so I think that there's a lot of efficiencies and a lot of tools within Pioneer that will allow you to do that. There's a lot of really, you know, great health files as well that you know could be a resource for your staff.
Talking about the team, Sirena, you said that you speak on talking about building team and things like that. Any tips for what's really worked with you guys in the pharmacy?
For us, it's definitely been a fly by the seat of your pants, which isn't always the best way to do it. When we decided to develop my role, which is the director of pharmacy operations, it was literally, we were at NCPA in 2019.
Wow.
We met Cody Clifton.
Okay.
Randomly, which we thought was randomly. We found out it wasn't quite as random. We were targeted.
You were targeted.
Yes, but and Kari was introducing me, and she was like, your title, she was like, is Director of Pharmacy Operations. And that was basically how I got my promotion.
That was 1 minute and 30 seconds after I hired Cody Clifton, 2 minutes after I met him.
Yes. And then
busy few minutes.
We came back, but it was essentially because we had purchased a second store and needed a role at both stores of don't know of importance, but just basically leadership roles in both stores, knowing that Kari was going to be taken from the Duvall store and really put into our Granite Falls location. That move though from technician into more of a leadership role, it's really difficult to get kind of, I mean, you've been working side by side with all of these people for 15 plus years. I mean, granted, most of them hadn't been there that long, but to make that kind of transition is really difficult. So, Duvall Family Drugs and Kari and I decided that I would take some management courses through a local community college. So I did that online, which kind of helped develop some skills and some, management skills, some negotiating skills, just a few things to get under my belt. As Kari mentioned, she's an amazing business owner. Like, honestly, she's a great business owner, but management skills.
Kind of my way or the highway sort of mentality.
Yeah.
It's like Hulk smash.
The problem is that's how you manage.
Is the problem. So
back to the birds of a feather.
Yes. So there's been a lot of learning, a lot of just, again, fly by the seat of your pants. I feel like though the management courses in the community college really helped. And then I think age has helped a lot. I mean, not that I wasn't already old when I got the position, but I think being in the company for 15 years and not being 20 coming into that position really helped.
Yeah.
Like we said in the beginning, I had a tendency to be really spicy when I was young. So that's helped some.
We both mellowed with age.
Yes.
With age comes wisdom.
Yes. And then just my knowledge base has really been something. So a lot of people come to me with questions already. I was already kind of in a leadership role, especially with the computer system. Everybody comes to me with all of their questions. If they can't figure it out, they know that I can.
Yep.
And then I act as a liaison a lot of times in between the staff and Kari. So if anybody has problems or questions, because Kari's just really not on location a lot, and obviously I have a direct line to Kari. So anytime there's something that's going on, if it's not something that we can handle amongst ourselves, then I kind of act as that liaison in between the staff and Kari too. So because having a good relationship with Kari's helped a lot.
Yeah, and that's kind of that servant leader that, she promoted somebody who's helping everybody else, right? Who was their go-to person already. We try to do that. We try to find people to promote who are already doing the job of serving a group, right? And just putting them above is kind of, this is the person to serve you in a management capacity.
It does get tricky though. I mean, there are definitely, among the technician roles, it's for some of the staff, it was hard for them to see another technician as their boss now.
Right.
And we weeded through a couple that just it didn't work for. One thing I can say for Sirena is that she's also a lifelong learner. She's one of those people who's always looking for information, for something new. She's the podcast girl. You and I have already talked about how I feel about them typically. My mind is, I turn on a podcast in the car and,
you're
2 miles down the road, my mind is already someplace else. I'm like, what did they just say? I have no idea. So I can't focus like that.
I too enjoy, like she said, I enjoy learning. I always want more. And so I have a tendency to get involved in everything. So being involved in like CPESN has been wonderful. And I'm on the Council of Experts for PS3, the Pharmacy Services Support Staff, which has been really great for helping develop my leadership role and really been a phenomenal way of helping support my staff and helping develop all of them, helping them develop out all of their roles and really helped switch my mindset too in not just referring to everybody as, not pigeonholing people into just like, you're a tech, you just need to be standing here filling prescriptions. But we have, since I've been in this role, which I believe it's been since December. I think it was October that
October through March was the initial contract.
Yeah, when it started, it has helped us change our workflow in the pharmacy immensely. And so, being able to be involved in all of those things has really helped develop out my leadership role too. So it's not so much that I look at myself as a manager as much as a leader, and really just trying to help keep that leadership role involved and helping steer people in a certain direction.
In a community where you have two of those big chains and such a small population, it seems like it's really important that you serve your patients differently than those chains can. And it seems like you guys have found some really exciting ways to do that. And I love the health worker idea where, it's such an opportunity to, really meet your patients where they live and understand those challenges that they're facing. So tell me a little bit about how that actually works practically. I'm really interested to hear, how that works on a, on a sustainability model. How are you able to, find a way to have that more complex role and have a return on investment or a return in community investment? Where does that work on a business sense?
I think the biggest part in our community is the feedback that we get from our patients is that they don't want to feel like a number. And I feel like a lot of community pharmacies can agree with that. But these patients appreciate, knowing that they're getting taken care of, knowing that they don't have to have so much of a burden on their health or their medications. So I think the biggest thing is finding a way, and Pioneer has been big for us for this, but finding a way to just work it into our normal workflow to where, we're not needing to do extra work. Because if we're already, signing these patients up on MedSync, we already have a template of things that we can ask them every month when we call them. So we're asking them if they've had any changes, and not just filling medications, but using it as an opportunity to do some medication management services every month. So any questions, any changes, are they up to date on all their vaccines? And if they don't know, transfer them over to a pharmacist, and they'll say, I never knew that I needed to get my shingle shot. So it's just an opportunity for us to continue to offer those services. And they'll say, at the chain stores, they didn't always take the opportunity to look into my profile and, they'll feel what I say, but they're not going to make those recommendations. So I think just making a way where it's a part of our workflow to where we can, assess their profile every month and get them taken care of. And along with those phone calls, having those technicians who are making those calls, making a normal part of their workflow, like Tim said, identifying those social determinants of health, finding ways that these patients, are they having trouble paying for their medications? If so, our community health workers can set them up on patient assistance programs and give them community resources. Are they having trouble getting to the pharmacy to pick it up? Do they need delivery, or do they need these different community resources, like I said? So I think the biggest thing is, letting these patients know that we're caring for them and we're going out of our way, but still incorporating our workflow to find a way to let them know that they're getting taken care of and all the services that we offer.
When I came to PDS, I came on board as one of the business coaches. And then 18 months later, in September, October of 2010, stepped into the chief operating officer role. And one of the things that the president founder, Dan Benamos, had wanted to do was to create a training curriculum specific to pharmacy owners and their teams. And I said, well, what is the one thing? And that had been my background, of course, in my previous career, training and operations heavy. And so I said, what's the one gap, if you could say sort of the universal pain point for independent pharmacy owners, what would that be? He didn't miss a beat. In a nanosecond, he said leadership. And I said, well, you're in luck because I can build that. So we offered the very first advanced leadership program, I want to say it was like 2012 maybe. And then in 2013, we redesigned it. Sharon Rasnick, who's still with Pharmacy Development Services, Terry Norvell, and myself, and because part of my background, I'm a bit of a unicorn. I used to say, well, I'm just a generalist because I was in training and operations and I could just kind of, get her done and all kinds of, implementer, you name it. But my passion and my true love really is in facilitating and training. And part of that, of course, is instructional design. And so I said, yeah, I can build that. I was very confident about that. Dan probably was not so confident at the time. But we actually, the three of us co-created what exists still to this day is the Advanced Leadership Program for pharmacy owners and teams. And I would say probably by this year, I know when I left at the end of January last year, which was 2021, I bet we'd already put through over 1,000 pharmacy owners and their team members. Yeah. And it really became sort of the cornerstone, the flagship program. Ironically, it's not all that specific to pharmacy. It's specific to leadership, right? And I think that, part of that bit of that unicorn is because I had been in roles and positions my entire adult career in managing and leading high performance teams and being accountable and responsible over and over again for performance and results. I think that that's probably part of the secret sauce of that program is that it was very applicable, right? I kind of come to the table with this pragmatism. I'm a lifelong learner. I'm a lifelong student. I read all the time. And yet I'm also, if you don't tell me what I'm going to do with this or how I'm going to use it, then I'm not interested. You're right. My enthusiasm begins to wane proportionately because I want to know that I can actually use this. I want to do something with it, so to speak. So I think that was part of it, right? Is that we were able to provide these tools and resources that oftentimes these folks had never even heard of.
Right. Yeah. Just not exposed to.
No, not exposed. You hit the nail on the head, Jeff. No exposure.
Yeah.
I think the other secret sauce is that we based it in neuroscience. So it was based in neuroscience and how the brain works, not a deep dive into the science of it, but enough that we become really super aware, that self-awareness of how we show up and our behavior and how our brains are operating so that we can actually make a choice to do things differently, right? I mean, hey, if what we're doing and how we're showing up is netting phenomenal results, great. But if they're not, and we've got some of that dissonance or that discord or disconnect going on, then we've got to be able to step back and say, okay, what do I need to change here? Or what do I need to do differently? So I think that was, and then the third piece of the secret sauce around that program, in my estimation, was the connection. Right? The absolute opportunity to get out of your own environment and into a positive, supportive, and respectful place where you were with like-minded people.
Right.
Right.
Like similar industry. Yep.
Exactly.
Challenges.
We've got the same pain points. We're all losing sleep over the same things. My team is driving me crazy. I don't know what to do. So that, to me, really, the combination of those three things really, I think, created a powerful program.
Would you guys mind if I went into the new research for how to get people to change their mind?
I would love it.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is really neat. So Jonah Berger is the lead researcher on this, and I mean, who doesn't want to change someone's mind, right? You want to,
that's Marc's whole job.
You want to convince your spouse to go to dinner where you want to go to dinner, right? Or not to go see the mother-in-law on Sunday afternoon. I mean, everyone wants to change someone's mind about something.
But never your mother-in-law.
Never the mother-in-law. She's always right. But the kids, we got to change their minds occasionally, right? So there's 5 basic aha moments that were in the research that Jonah found. And he kind of starts off with, hey, when we want to change something and change someone's mind, a lot of times we start with the physical world. So if I want to move a chair, I'm going to push a chair and I'm going to push harder until it actually moves and it's going to move across the room. I'm going to change its physical state. So we associate a lot of how we're going to change someone's mind with the physical state changes. And so, the number one thing he says is don't push harder, We just need to take the parking brake off. So if someone is not want to change their mind, let's find out what is holding them up. What is the barrier that they have their brakes on for? And, in one of his books, he goes into, if a parking brake is on in a car, we can put it in drive. We can give it more gas. We can turn the wheels, but it's not going to go anywhere, right? Not very fast anyway until we get the parking brake off. So if we try to change someone's mind, we think that if we just add that more information or more good reasons, then they're eventually going to do whatever we ask. But actually what we found is adding more pressure, it only creates more resistance. And so, instead, if we'll work on, thinking about sitting in a car, parked on that gentle slope, kind of getting that analogy going, then when we push harder and harder, it doesn't get anywhere, we can remove those brakes and get barriers to action removed so that the persuasion kind of happens naturally. The car's going to start rolling on the hill when those are off. Number 2 was somewhat related, but it was to reduce basically their reactance, so how they react to the change, by offering a choice. And I experiment all these on my kid and my team as well, right? My team knows that I'm always experimenting and trying new things. They know if I suggest something, it's just kind of me testing the water. It's not so much I'm really going to make the change, but they're wonderful people. So if we're going to reduce the reactance, we need to give them a little bit of freedom of control over our lives. And I kind of relate this a little bit to salesmen. When you have a salesman, everyone's guards just go up, The minute the car salesman is walking towards you, you're thinking, we are not buying a car. We are not buying a car. Yep. And that kind of comes too from some owners, especially the high level, like innovators. A lot of them that I work with, their teams they dread, oh my gosh, what is our next idea going to be? Because it's going to cause more work. And so to disarm those defenses, you can give someone a menu of 2 or 3 options, and some might be worse than others, but they got options and they got a chance to choose a little bit of what they could do. Another big one is just kind of easing their endowment, basically, by pointing out the cost of the status quo. People are just naturally attached to the things that they're already doing, the ideas that they already have. I remember when I bought my very first store, they were still stamping the back of every class 2 narcotic with a red N, and they were still stamping the back of every 3 through 5 with a red C, which was a rule like 25 years ago.
Right.
It's like, what a waste of time to going through all those books and stamping those hard copies. By the way, the prescription number is printing an N or a C, next to the number. Right. They couldn't give up that stamp. And so helping them loosen their grip and just show them all the time you're spending on that, the status quo is not really as easy or harmless as we might think. And so if we can make the inconvenience of the change look more appealing than the cost of the inaction, that tends to really help people to kind of change their mind a little bit. And I think pharmacists run into this a lot with patients too, and I use these techniques a lot with the people I coach, try to help them figure out how can we move this person forward. Another one, which is, it seems simple, but we don't ever do it, is we shrink the distance by asking for less. And so if you're going to start, immunizations was your example earlier, instead of saying, hey, let's give 1,000 immunizations this year, hey, let's start immunizations and tell me what you think you'd be interested in helping me with, when someone walks in the door wanting one of those. And we hope that if we, if people of a different political persuasion will suddenly get it, is what we think. And we're immediately going to switch to our side of the ideas. But we got to shrink that distance. So ask for less first, get that to go, and then you can always ask for more later, once it goes well and they see it's not that bad now that we've started.
Yeah.
And once it's like a manageable change, there's a fascinating guy that contributed this research. He's a physical trainer who was like a bodybuilder, and he had an accident and he's paralyzed now. And so he had to figure out how to be a personal trainer and make a living sitting in a wheelchair, not being able to show people how to do the workout. And, one thing that he has really gotten into is the psychology behind behaviors and how people show up to act. And, one thing that he has started is, let's get the routine of you showing up to the gym. So I want you to come and I want you to work out for 5 minutes. And you can choose. Is it 3 days a week, 4 days a week, whatever you choose, we're going to do every week. And once you're coming for 5 minutes every single week, 3 times a week, now I can add on 5 more minutes and it's not that big a deal to you.
Right.
And then I can add on 5 more minutes. And so just kind of getting to start. And then, the number 5 is just alleviate uncertainty by lowering the barrier, basically, to whatever you're going to trial. And I always, I quote a lot of different authors, so I love to read just organizational psychology. But Jim Collins always says, don't ever tell people how you're going to get there. Always tell them where you're headed.
Right.
And I think that's part of that lowering that barrier to the trial is, hey guys, we're gonna try this for a little while. Here's where we're trying to get. That's where we're headed. And what we're about to change in workflow may or may not work, and I might change my mind tomorrow, but we're gonna try it and see how it works. And I think, getting that combination, I told you about employee engagement. I think there's a quote I really like that says, if a child is poor in math and good at tennis, most people would hire a math tutor, but I would rather hire a tennis coach. That's from the 9 Lives of Work. We think everyone needs to be cross-trained and diverse.
Right.
But the research now shows if they call it, I think they call it pointy in the book. We want to lean into people's pointiness. How can we lean into their strengths? But if you can figure out what their strengths are, if you can understand what makes them show up their best self. Another quote is kind of interesting that I think helps people show up their best self. But if you want to say that learning, can only happen when a child is interested, is kind of where the quote comes from. If he's not interested in what you're trying to teach them, and I see this in my own kid, it's like throwing marshmallows at their head and calling it eating. And that's a lot of what's going on in our pharmacies today. We come in from a conference like Connect or NCPA, and oh my gosh, I learned about this great new service we're going to offer, and they don't even know if they're interested in hearing what you have to say or not. Tell them what's in it for them. Lower that barrier to trial. We see that a lot of times with email, right? You get however many gigabytes for free,
right?
And then you fall in love with it, and it says, hey, we're going to start charging you 99 cents because you've outgrown your storage. Or Dropbox is another one.
Dropbox did that.
You've outgrown it. And those are examples that Jonah gives. But if you can get people to show up their best selves, and you can use these barriers to change and try to help motivate them, and then people can choose how they're going to show up. And I would say another thing is people kind of get stuck in a plan. And almost everyone that works for me today would probably tell you that what they're doing for me today is not at all what they thought they were hired for.
Right.
But it's because they get
kind
there
of the Pioneer motto, right?
That's what happens here too.
Happens all the time. Pioneer. Yeah, absolutely. I talked to 4 or 5 different Pioneer employees at the convention, at the conference you guys had. And, hey, I haven't heard from you in a while. They say, oh, well, I'm doing this now for the company, and it's like, oh, do you like that? And they said, well, you know what? I actually love it. It's actually pretty good. I really like that, And so that's the key is I am a pharmacist who loves to be a pharmacist, but I spend all my days, coaching. I love the employee engagement and get people to show up their best self and ultimately just move pharmacy forward by doing that.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you get your podcast.
Give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts to help us reach more pharmacy professionals like you.